So, good morning. Good to see you on the screen. So,
Same, I'll be there in 15, but yes.
that's amazing of you. Okay, we're going to get started momentarily. Okay, we're going to be going into Shul today about the domain that we call the Carmelite. The Carmelite is a domain that's a rabbinically is an issue for a person to go ahead and carry in that area. It's not public on a Torah level, on a biblical level. It's not public, and it's not private. So it's not considered public property. It's not considered private property. So it's like it has its own domain, and it's considered on a Torah level. It's considered a makom patur, an exempt area. But the rabbis, in their great wisdom to protect us, they gave it a status, this area, because it has certain resemblances of private and public. They said you cannot carry 4 amot, 6 to 8 feet. You can't pick up something in there and carry 6 to 8 feet because it's like carrying, just like you can't carry in public property 4 amot, 6 to 8 feet. And also they said you can't carry from public property into this area. You can't carry from private property into this area, or from this area into public, or in this area into private. Those are some of the laws of the Carmelite. We left off yesterday. Rav Sheshet said about a Carmelite. He said a Carmelite, we welcome Asaf, is tofesed arasara. A Carmelite takes hold up to 10 tvachim. And the Gemara wanted to know, what does it mean that it takes hold until 10 tvachim? What does that mean? So the Gemara said, um, Ilema, I think we said this point, but we'll just review it on 7a3 on the right side. If this area has a partition, the height of 10 tvachim, which is the normal size wall, as we spoke about by sukkah, to be a wall for sukkah, it has to be 10 tvachim high, a minimum of 10 tvachim. Or else, if you have a wall less than 10 tvachim, it's around 35 to 40 inches. If it's less than that, it's not considered a wall regarding sukkah. So do you think you also need that there has to be a partition of 10 tvachim surrounding this 35 to 40 inches surrounding this area in order to have the status of a Carmelite? V'ilo, and if it does not have that dimension, lo havi Carmelite, it's not considered a Carmelite. It's not considered the rabbis would not forbade it. So the Gemara said, what do you mean? V'ama Rav Gidol v'lo, is that true? V'ama Rav Gidol Rav Chia bar Yosef Amar Rav, bayit she'im b'toch asara. You have a house, and the house, the space from the ground to the ceiling is less than 10 tvachim. It does not. It's very small. It doesn't even have the size of the height of a regular. The airspace is not the airspace of 10 tvachim. And we welcome Ralph. And v'keiruyo mashlim al. And the ceiling, the thickness of the ceiling makes it the height of 10 tvachim. So let's say you had around 9 tvachim, let's say 30 or so inches from the ground to the ceiling of the house. So here we have a house that's not the typical type of house. To be a typical type of house, there's a certain amount of space, of living space, to be able to walk or to stand or to move around, or so here, I mean, it's hard to walk in a space that's only 10 tvachim high. Also, it's only 35, 40 inches, obviously, but it's at least an area, more of a private area that has some sort of importance. You could say this is really a private, normal private area. But we said if we have a house, that the house does not have within it 10 tvachim, from the ground to the ceiling is lower than 10 tvachim, and the roof of the house, the thickness of the roof makes it to 10 tvachim, we say al gago, on top of the roof of the house. The roof of the house has from the bottom, including the roof. Now you have a 10 tvachim. You have a height of 10 tvachim. So therefore, the top of the house is considered private property because you have a height of 10 tvachim and a width of 4 tvachim. So al gabo mutar l'tatakul. You could carry things, place things. You want to have do things on top of the roof. You want to walk around with stuff and eat on top of the roof. The rooftop of such a roof is considered, that rooftop is considered private property. However, betocho, but inside that house, since inside the house you do not have 10 tvachim, the interior of the house is enclosed by walls that don't meet the walls itself are less than 10 tvachim. It's only that it's the ceiling that made it 10 tvachim high, but the walls itself are not 10 tvachim. So it's not, we say that you cannot carry inside that house like every other house you could carry. In your house, you could do whatever you want. But this house does not meet the requirements of a normal private property. And since it's normal private property, the rabbi said that you cannot carry within this area. Just they made it into a carmelit. They made it into a rabbinic forbidden area, because it's not really a properly enclosed area. So it's not really a properly enclosed area. So if you're going to carry in this house, which is not properly enclosed, so then you're going to come to carry in a real area which is not properly enclosed, in a real public, in a public domain. So therefore, the rabbis, out of their concern, they said that you cannot carry inside this type of domain that's not really meets the definition of private. Because if you're going to carry within this house, which does not meet the definition of properly private domain, you might come to carry in an area which actually is a real public domain. So the aim is only 4 amot. So we see up to 4 amot. You cannot carry 4 amot. So we see that you do not need to have partitions, walls of 10 tvachim, in order for it to be considered a carmelit. In order for it to have this name of a carmelit, it could be a carmelit even if you do not have walls of 10 tvachim. So the Gemara says, "Elamai v'tos tefesed arasara." So what does the rabbi mean when the rabbi said it's tofesed arasara, that the carmelit goes up to 10 tvachim? So here the Gemara says the following. It's going to be the conclusion of the Gemara on this point. The arasara hu dehave carmelit. Until you have up to 10 tvachim, the airspace of a carmelit, the airspace of this area that's rabbinically forbidden, like we said, for instance, the ocean, to carry, in the ocean, or to, to throw something in the ocean over the area of the ocean. That's if it goes, or let's say a field. You have a field, these open fields, the valley. So or the benches that we spoke about. If the benches in front of the stores, they have these benches that the merchants sit. So, and we said that area, you cannot place something down on that area, even though it's not really public, and it's not really private. We said you can't, because it has some people, if you place things down on the benches, you might come to place it in public property or into private property. And we said you can't, let's say the valley, those fields, We said those fields you cannot, uh, carry in those fields. You know, so we said, we gave those fields a status of a rabbinically prohibited place to carry. So the Gemara says that Mechiha de Amale Rav Shmuel Rav Yehuda. Like Rav Shmuel says to Rav Yehuda that it's up to, let's say a Rishut Rabim, a public domain. We learned about a public domain. If you throw something in a public domain, we said the airspace that you throw in public that's a problem is only the airspace from the ground till 10 tfachim, till around 40 inches. If you throw something above 40 inches, we said that let's say if you throw something, you throw a dart, or you throw something if you higher than 40 inches, we said that higher than 40 inches is not considered the airspace of public property. And we said if you do that, if you throw something higher than 40 inches, you will be exempt. It would not be in violation of the Shabbat. So here we're saying the same thing regarding the Carmelit. If whatever item is called this rabbinic domain that's prohibited for you to carry or to put things into, but if you throw something, if something that goes over that airspace, over 10 tvachim, higher than 10 tvachim, higher than 40 inches, let's say 35 to 40 inches, that will not be in violation of the Shabbat. And the Gemara says, Ki had Ama Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yehuda, lo tave mila Shabbat l'mayl ma'asara. Don't have to matters of Shabbat higher than 10 tvachim. You don't have to discuss those matters. What does it mean? You don't have to those matters. What does he mean that higher than 10 tvachim? There's nothing to discuss. So the Gemara says, he said, so what if we have a private domain? Let's say the top of the roof of your house, right? And let's say, and that's higher than the, or let's say, you're in your private property, right? And somebody throws something, right? And so let's see here. The Gemara is going to give an example. The Gemara says, let's say, let's say you stuck a pole in private property, right? So the pole is pretty tall. The Gemara says, let's say v'zorak v'nocha gabav. Somebody threw something, let's say from public property, and it went on from public property on top of the pole. So now, what about, let's say the pole is, the Gemara says, even if the pole, we welcome Emmanuel, the pole is tremendous, very high. The pole, let's say, is 100 amot high, 200 feet high, right? So the question is, and it landed on top of the pole. So we say, the person is chayav. The person is obligated. Now, the pole itself, we're talking about a case that the pole itself doesn't have the dimensions of private property. The pole is not 4 tvachim. It's not, let's say, we're not talking about something that has a width of 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. It's not like a wall that we said, if you have a wall that's a certain height and a certain width, that wall becomes private property, that wall itself. Here we're talking about a pole, which is very thin, does not have a width of 15 inches by 15 inches. So really, and now the item lands on top of this pole. So it's in the airspace of private property because the pole is resting on private property. So now the question is, do we say that you're in violation of the Shabbat if you threw something from public property onto this onto this pole. Or so we say, or let's say you went ahead. Yeah, so let's say that would be the case. You threw from the, let's say, from the public property onto this pole. So we say that it would be chayav. The person would be in violation of the Shabbat. Why is it in violation of the Shabbat? When it comes to private property, the domain of private property, the airspace is still that's above the private property has a status of the private property itself. And since it has a status of the, meaning it's different than public property. When it comes to public property, we say that the airspace above anything, if it's above 10 tfachim, higher than the area, if you have public property in the street, someone throws something, let's say in public property, and he throws it above 10 tfachim, higher than 10 tfachim, so we say that would not be considered. And let's say you threw it and it attached itself to the wall. It went 4 amot in public property, but the fact but the fact that it went in the airspace, it traveled 4 amot in an area which is higher than 10 tfachim. That being that it traveled in that space, he would not be chayav. Let's say you threw it into and you threw a fig or dates. Let's say dates something, and it stuck to the wall, and you threw it. So it only went in airspace of public property higher than 10 tfachim. So you would be exempt in such a situation. But that's when it comes to public property, the airspace of public property above 10 tfachim. However, airspace of above private property has a status of private property itself. And therefore, therefore the Gemara says, the Gemara says, that now we're turning the page, if he's coming to tell us, now we're on Zion number base, 17, maybe he's coming to tell us that the airspace of public property does not apply to higher than 10 tefachim, higher than 40 inches. That's what we said. The Gemara says he doesn't need to tell us that. The rabbi doesn't need to tell us that. When the rabbi says, Rabbi Shmuel says to Rabbi Huda, Shirana, he says to Rabbi Huda, sharp one, Lo ta'aviv mila Shabbat l'mayla ma'asara. Don't engage in things that regarding laws of Shabbat if they're higher than 10 tefachim, as if there's no issue, there's no concern about something that's higher than 10 tefachim. What is he referring to? Does he mean to say that there's no public domain does not apply to the airspace above 10 tefachim? So the Gemara says that we know already. Masnitani. It's a Mishnah. The rabbi doesn't have to tell us something that's obvious. Again, let's get everything clear. Not these very complex things that we're talking about. We have something called public property. We have something called private property. We said you can't go ahead and throw something from public property 4 amot in public property, right? If I go ahead and I throw something and it travels 4 amot, it goes in the air 4 amot, let's say it goes 6 to 8 feet. I threw the ball 6 to 8 feet, and then it landed. It went, and let's say it landed in the public property. It started in public property. It traveled 6 to 8 feet. That was a violation of Shabbat, correct, Saul? But if I throw the ball above 10 tefachim, and if I throw it above 10 tefachim, I throw it into, there was a basket, and it lands in the basket on the wall. There was a wall, and there's a basket extending from the wall that let's say that it caught the ball, and it stayed still. And the basket is over the public property. So we say over here, since I threw it, it went in the airspace of 10 higher. I threw it was high above 10 tfachim of the ground. That's how it traveled. The 4 amot that it traveled was 4 amot in public in airspace that's above 10 tfachim. So technically, it should be the same thing, even if it lands. You see, the question: if it landed after it went 10 tfachim, I threw it. It would the height above 10, traveled 10 tfachim, over 10 tfachim, and then let's say it dropped down and landed in a hole in the ground. So it's true. Let's say the hole is not so deep. So let's say it landed on public property, but it went from public to public, but where it traveled, the traveling was an airspace above 10 tfachim. So we say that you're exempt. Technically, you're exempt. You wouldn't have to bring a korban chatat, a sin offering. But when it comes to private property, the Gemara says, airspace above private property would have the status of the private property itself, meaning it's high, meaning above, meaning if let's say you have airspace higher than 10 tfachim, it's above 10 tfachim. The same airspace, it's different than public. Public property, we say the airspace above 10 tfachim it's not problematic airspace. That airspace, if something goes in the air, you throw something, and it travels 4 amot, 6 to 8 feet in public property, but it did not travel low within 35 to 40 inches from the ground. It traveled above. That seems to be not a problem, the Gemara says. But when it comes to private property, the airspace, private property, if this is private, the whole airspace above it is considered private, even though the airspace is above 10 tfachim. So we gave the example. You have a pole in your property, and the pole goes up 100 feet, 200 feet. So it's more than 10 tfachim, it's more than 35 to 40 inches from the ground. And somebody throws something goes from public property to your private property. But where did it landed? But where did it go? When it entered your private property, it entered above, let's say it was above 10 tfachim. It entered above, higher than 10 tfachim from the ground, right? So we say that even though this pole itself is, it's not, in itself, it doesn't have the dimensions of private property, because the pole itself is thin. It doesn't have a width of 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim. It's high, but it doesn't. So it's like it's landing on top of the pole. It's like in the air space of private property, but it's way above the ground. It's way above the ground. It's more than 10 tfachim higher, but that does not. The rabbi says that still, regarding Shabbat, we still consider private property the airspace above the private property. That's the contrast to the airspace above public property to the airspace above private property. And now the Gemara says the Carmelite, this domain that's rabbinically prohibited for you to carry within, is going to be, we're going to give it the status of public property, which means that leniency, that just like public property, if it's higher, if you throw something, as we gave the example, right, Saul? If you threw a ball in public, from public to public, but it traveled, the airspace that it traveled was 4 amot, 6 to 8 feet, above 10 tfachim from the ground, above 40 inches of the ground, or 35 to 40 inches, it did not travel in forbidden space. You know, in the airplanes, there's certain spaces that the pilots can't travel, right? You can't travel that area. It's a forbidden area. So just maybe that's maybe that's a way to remember when it comes to Shabbat, the forbidden airspace in public property is only within a certain height of the ground. If it's above that height, that's not forbidden airspace. Is that clear, so? In contrast to private property, morning doctor, private property is considered forbidden airspace even higher than 10 tvachim. So that's what the Gemara says. So the Gemara says, so what is the chidush when he says, don't engage in things of Shabbat higher than 10 tvachim? What is he referring to? He's not referring to that there's no issue of higher than the air. There's no problem with the airspace above 10 tvachim when it comes to public property, because that we know already. The later rabbi, doesn't have to tell us something that we know. It's a mission that says it not. Listen to the case of the Mishnah. We're now on 7b1. Mazel tov, mabruk. It not. Azoreg. Saul, you got it? Is it? Saul, is it getting clear? All right, Ralph, you hear what's going on?
Yes.
Very good. We got Ralph. Ralph is on board, right? Now, hope Asaf and Emmanuel also on board. Titnan, we learned in the Mishnah. Hazoreg dalan amod bekotel lamayla meyut fachim. A person threw something. He threw something in public property. He threw it higher, the airspace of higher than 10 tvachim, right?
Was he in public property when he threw it?
Yes, he's in public property when he threw it. He threw it above 10 tvachim from the ground. It was over 35 to 40 inches from the ground. So its travel space where it traveled was higher than 10 tvachim from the ground. Kizorek ba'avir. We say it's like throwing in the air, meaning he is exempt because higher than 10 tvachim is not considered a forbidden area. Say it again? Right. That's what the Gemara says. Right. So the Gemara says, and therefore, however, if you throw it lower than 10 tvachim, it's kasorik ba'aret. It's like you're throwing in the ground. And if you throw it in the ground, meaning, let's say you threw something that attached itself to the wall, let's say the dart. So if you threw it within 10 tvachim, the Gemara says, that exit, when it hits the wall, it's like it's resting on the ground. And therefore, this violation. And the Gemara says, Ella a karmelit. What is the novelty, the Gemara says? The novelty is that the karmelit, this rabbinic domain, has the same status as the public domain. In what sense? The Gemara says, the kilu, that does not have a problem, higher than 10 tvachim is not a problem. The kilu be'rabanan, the rabbis gave it mikule rishut hayachid. It has the leniency of private property, this karmelit, mikule rishut rabim, and the leniency of public property. What way? So the Gemara says, mikule rishut hayachid, in regarding the leniency of rishut hayachid, the ikam makom arba'a, if it has a width of 4 tvachim, hu tahavi karmelit. That's when it's a karmelit. Meaning, let's say a fire height. Let's say a fire hydrant is not so wide, but let's say this type of table. This type of table, if it would be in public property, in order for it to be if I want to go ahead and take something from public property and put it on top of this table, what would we say if this table would be in public property? What is this table? So this table, because it has a certain height, it's not part of public property. It's not called public property that people will walk on because it's too high. People don't step on this, right? Now, since it has a certain width, now it's not 10 tvachim high. If this would be 10 tvachim high, if this would be, let's say, 35 to 40 inches high, then it would be considered a private area. But let's say if the table that's in public property is not 10 tvachim high, but it has a certain width, then it's a rabbinic status of karmelit, a forbidden area. However, if it's less than 4 tvachim wide, let's say something which is, let's say a fire hydrant. Let's say if the width is less than 15 inches and 15 inches, then it's not even a forbidden area. So technically, you could take something, if you have, let's say, you're next to a fire hydrant and you're public property and you have, let's say you were standing next to the fire hydrant and then you realize you got something in your pocket, right? So technically you could go ahead and put it I'm standing next to the fire hydrant, or let's say I picked up something from public. I did not travel 4 amot in public property. I put it on top of the fire hydrant. Technically, that will be allowed because that fire hydrant, even though because it's higher than the fire hydrant is higher than 3 tvachim. It has it's not wide 4 tvach. It doesn't have 15 inches by 15 inches. That's called an exempt area. If not, if it does not have the dimensions of 15 inches by 15 inches, it's considered an exempt area. And what is the leniency regarding Rishut Rabim? Like we just said, that ad yudfachim would have a carmelit, only if it's up to 10 tvachim would that area be a problem. The airspace, but tvei tvachim will have a carmelit. The airspace above 10 tvachim is not carmelit, not rabbinically problematic. Now the Gemara goes back, Gufo. We said if you have a house, buy it. The inside of the house is very small. Morning, Josh. It's less than 35 to 40 inches. That's not a normal house. So it's not a normal house. If the airspace from the ceiling, the inside airspace is less than 35. Exactly. Right. You could sleep there. See, it's interesting. You could have a place that really people wouldn't really stand, but if you would sit in the place and you have enough room to sit down and you have enough room to lie down, meaning I presume 35 to 40 inches is enough to go ahead and sit down right over here. I'll sit down here. Just to be fair, I can sit down. Maybe it's around, could be around 40 inches. Right? This is around 40 inches. And then that's called a private area. That can be considered private, even though the ceiling is right above my head. You can have a ceiling right above my head, but I'm sitting down in that space. I could sleep in the space. I could sit in that space. That can be considered private. I presume if it's less than 10 tvachim, you can't really even sit really in such a place properly. If it's so low, that's not called a real private place. Therefore, if I have such a place, I made such a homeless area like that type of tent, and I don't have proper space from the ground to, I don't have 35 to 40 inches from the ground to the ceiling, that's not called private.
You're saying 10 inches, 35 inches considered a carmelit?
A carmelit would be from around 11 inches, from around 3 tvachim. If you have an item, a space that's 3 tvachim high, up to 10 tvachim high. That area, that space, I'm saying, but 10 tvachim is only 35 to 40 inches, right? So if you have that space, let's say we said benches, right? Half it's 10 of them. So if you have let's say like I gave you an example, this table. If this table would be in public property, so if this table is less than 10 tvachim, it's less than 10 tvachim high, and it has 15 inches by 15 inches, this would be a rabbinic domain problem, meaning I would not be able to pick something up from public and put it on top of it, because we treat it like private. And I would not be able to take something from this and put it into private area.
Something smaller than a carmelit, considered private.
Very good. So something smaller than a carmelit. So now the question is, what? Sometimes it depends. Smaller carmelit, if it's on the width area, if let's say it does not meet the dimensions of the width of the carmelit, that would be considered. But it reaches the height. It's within 3 and 10. That would be considered an exempt area totally. That area would be exempt.
wider.
No, if it's narrower, if it doesn't have 4 tvachim by 4, if, let's say this would be a pole. I have a pole in public property, a small pole, and now the pole that doesn't have proper width. There's no width to it really, right? And that pole is less than, it's, let's say, between 3, it's higher, the pole has a height of 11 inches, and let's say it's lower than 35 to 40 inches. So that pole would be considered totally exempt area. If I would want to put anything on that pole, I would be allowed to. That pole does not have the status of, it's considered exempt area. That's that. Neither private or public, right? It does not have its own life to it because of its insignificance, and because of its insignificance, so therefore it's like it has the status of, if you go from public, so therefore it doesn't have any significance, and therefore if you take something from public to private to that area, it's like part of that. It's like part of that public that you just went from.
What if the car leaks in a public area, you're in a private area? It's like a stool right outside.
Right. So that's right. That's a great point. Let's say a person has, let's say, a stool, an elevated area that's right outside your house. So technically, it would seem if that elevated area is it's elevated 3 tvachim above the walking of the public, right? So therefore, the public walks like this, but now you have this, but this is not, let's say the public is here, and now your elevated area right outside your house is this. So the public, because it's elevated, it should, and it's above the ground, it should have its own status. It wouldn't be considered part of that public. That's what it would seem like. We have to look more in the halacha. Might not be considered part of the public property because of its own, it has its elevation. We saw something about this earlier, about this istaba. The Gemara talked about this istaba. Therefore, the public can't walk easily through this, right? It's elevated. You can't walk on something. If you're walking on the ground, if I'm walking on the ground here, and then there's something over here that's elevated 11 inches, I'm not walking on top of that, right? So therefore, that would make that area. Now the question is, how wide is that area?
Right, so it's been before it's.
If this was on, then it should be an exempt area.
Right, that means that here you could walk out of a house, place something on that thing, and then it'll be
In an exempt, and it won't even be a carmelit.
It's gonna exempt area, so you can put it on there, and then you can take it to public domain.
No, then technically you could.
So you
It sounds-
can't, that could be a transfer point. Take my point, is you use that as a transfer point. Take something.
Right, but we do say we don't want you to take something from private to an exempt area and then to public. Because if you do that, if you do all those 3 steps, then you might come to actually take from private directly to public. So therefore, we don't want that stoppage in the middle. Okay, already time flies when you're having fun. It's already time to go daven. Have a great.
Sort of like the average person's height, or is what, like
6 feet. It's about 6.
5'10". That's my point. Meaning the average person's height is 5'10". They have something in their hand, the public domain. Anybody's to be thrown. I mean, unless you're much smaller, like the average person, if they throw anything, they're going to be above that rule of.
Right, but it's brought down. If you're carrying something, even though you're carrying it, I still looked it up. When you're carrying above 10 tvachim, that still would be a problem. But if you throw it, right, technically it sounds like if you throw something and it lands in the public, again, not that you throw it from public to private.
Yeah, in public, something in theory, you should pass it friend up, friend up, friend. That's above text, but what I mean, it's above their waistline, Nobody's throwing I mean, everybody's hand can reach only as low as basically their waist or a little bit lower. So everybody's throw is gonna be above.
Right. The only thing we have to see if there's a difference throwing into a wall, which when attached to the wall that we say that's not a problem, or throwing into a person. Would that be any difference? Logically, you know, if the whole ear went 4 amot in above 10 tvachim, what should be the difference? But we'd have to check that out. Is there a difference between throwing it to a wall and the wall catches it, attaches to the wall, a darn into a wall, or throwing it to a person?
Right, so I mean, all these things are nice, it's like, what's the practical, like, do they give practical?
I mean,
I don't think tips, like, all right, so we're giving these very specific details about these certain circumstances, you can do something. All right, so,
how did the fat manifest practically?
yeah, like, that,
Right. We're going to see later on in the tractate, we'll talk about if somebody, you know, what do you do in certain situations? You have, if your wallet, you have certain things, or you have, the Gemara is going to talk about how to deal with, you know, it comes dark Friday afternoon, and how do you deal with those items? So we'll see, we have to see more about that. Okay. Have a great day, everybody. Once we know the rule, general rules, now we could try to figure out how to deal with under special circumstances. Ralph, have a great day. Ralph, I wanted to apologize. Yesterday, I wanted to call you up. Forgot to wish you a great day. So I wanted to wish you, I owed you one for yesterday.
Thank you. You too.
Okay. Have a great day. Have a great Shabbat.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye. Shalom.